Welcome to the Private Lender Podcast with your hosts from Hard Money Bankers, Jason Balin and Chris Haddon. This podcast is sponsored by hardmoneymastermind.com.
Hey everyone, Chris and Jason here. Thanks for checking out the Private Lenders Podcast. One quick announcement before we get started. We are having our next Inner Circle meeting in Nashville, Tennessee, the week of the 6th of November. So we're about 20 or 25 private lenders from different markets around the company who get together a few times a year to share knowledge, deals, information, resources, and to have some fun. So if you are a private lender and you have, say, maybe anywhere over $5 million outstanding in private loans of capital you control, we encourage you to apply at Hard Money Mastermind, innercircle.com. Again, we're on a wait list, but we could possibly have some openings for the November meeting. We're doing a Tuesday golf day, and then we have meetings the 8th and 9th of November. Then everyone will fly home probably Thursday night or Friday. Once again, check it out, Hard Money Mastermind, innercircle.com to apply. All right. So today we're discussing what really happens when a loan goes into default, when it first starts. And part of the reason, since we were talking about the mastermind is, or the inner circle, is because some inner circle members, as they grow their loan portfolio and annual volume, are starting to pick up some defaults. It's bound to happen, eventually, right? And we manage a handful of defaults at all times, and they're in different stages and they work out. And so here's how it goes. First, you have to take a look at what's going on with the borrower and the property right now. Why they get into default? Is the construction job done? Is it incomplete? Are they still active on it? Maybe they're just behind in payments and they're going to finish it. Have they walked away completely? Because what you're going to do is going to be different based on what the current status is. So like one, very common for a borrower to get done with a rehab job. It's on the market, listed for sale. Maybe your loan's $250, they're listed for $400, and it just hasn't sold yet and they're low on money, right? Short on cash, whatever the construction budget, no problem. You may or may not even want to send a default letter. You might not even put that into default rate, although you could, according to your loan docs, if they get a few payments behind. But you don't need to do anything else. That thing's going to sell. You're going to get paid off. You got plenty of equity, wiggle room. So that's a common thing. No reason to freak out. And then on the other extreme, if somebody completely walks away from a project and you can't get a hold of them, you have no choice but to start foreclosure process immediately, maybe even judgments, depending on the situation and the jurisdiction. Those are the two extremes. The common scenario is somewhere in the middle, where it's more of a judgment call, right? Like maybe the construction job is not complete, but they're working on it, but it's kind of slow and they're like 2 or 3 payments behind and the loan just matured. Then what do? You want to jump in on that one?
Yeah, no, absolutely. And here's the thing. There's kind of two sides to the term defaulted loans to begin with. You got the legal side and the business side. So the legal side is obviously, on the front end, when you're doing your loan docs and when your attorney's prepping your loan docs, you have the ability to default a borrower and protect the asset and go after them. And, any way you can, right? So foreclosure, a judgment. You want to make sure you have proper late fees in, what that late fee is. What's your default interest rate based on your state? Some states allow you to go up to 24%, things like that. So you want to be able to collect whatever you can on the legal side. So the important part to understand is, when you have a first lien position on these properties, that if the borrower defaults via payment, over construction, over maturity, whatever it is, right? You have the ability to collect and choose to do. I'm not saying you're going to choose to do and be as strict as possible. Now, you might not necessarily want to hit them as hard as you have the ability to, but it's important to be able to have that ability in your loan doc. So that's the legal side of things. Make sure you can go after them at any way possible and collect. The other side is the business side of like what happens in reality when a loan defaults, right? Like for instance, if your loans are due on the 5th of every month and somebody pays on the 6th, you probably don't want to change the default rate to 24%. You probably don't want to initiate foreclosure and go after them super, super hard. Do you have the ability to? Through your note and your loan docs, yes, but you probably don't want to. It's not a wise business decision to do so. There's always loans inside our portfolio that are not fully defaulted, even though technically they're in default. Like Chris was saying, they made late pays, or they went over the construction term, or they did something, and we're constantly communicating to them to do so. I remember back in the day when we were chatting with, having like newer investor meetings and things like that. One of the common things was like, this is great. If they default, we'll just take the property. And I'm like, yeah, I mean, in theory you could, but that's not typically, I feel like it's funny. Like back in the day, a lot of the private lending companies were like loan to own shops where it's like, hey, we'll just lend what we're comfortable buying this property at. And it's like, yeah, it doesn't really work like that, because you're never going to get the property. The ones that have a ridiculous amount of equity, you're never going to get that property back at those numbers, right? They're going to fire sale it. They're going to sell it. It's going to go over your amount at auctions. So you're not going to see those difference. Right. And, and the ones that you don't necessarily want to own, are the ones that, potentially you could, right. So you got to do some sort of workout on. So it's interesting kind of how that all plays out.
Yeah, it is funny. Like people say that, and it's an easy sentence to say, like, oh, the lender will just foreclose on the property and take it. Like the sentence is easy to say, but to actually make that happen in the vast majority of jurisdictions is another animal entirely. Some other things can pop up. I mean, first of all, if you need to get someone's attention, like this thing, technically they're in default, but they might work it out. I really like getting their attention with an attorney letter. Like that's step number one. We tack a fee onto the loan, change to the default rate, send it to the attorney to send out a default letter, and they send it out by certified mail, also by email, and that gets the borrower's attention way more than me kicking and screaming, or any of us here at HMB kicking and screaming. That attorney letter will make them react more effectively. Not all the time. Sometimes they dodge it, but that is the right first step when you want to get someone's attention, get on the phone, and see how everyone's going to get out of this deal. And oftentimes you won't need to take it any further than that, but that's the right place to start. And yeah, we're going to be working with Inner Circle members on this stuff because they don't always totally know what to do, which makes sense. Back in the day, like we didn't know exactly if we need to default them. And there's honestly some early on in HMB's history that we should have moved faster towards foreclosure because we didn't, like we gave them the benefit of the doubt a little bit, like, oh, they're going to work it out. And now we know better because it's 15 years later. Now we know better, and we know how different situations are going to play out based on the property, its current condition, the communication of the borrower, the quality of the borrower. And we would have moved faster in the direction of default on a few deals early on.
Yeah, I'm going to add to that because that's a really good point. Like you don't know what you don't know. And there was definitely deals that we look back in and potentially we either left money on the table, we should have moved quicker on it, we shouldn't have defaulted them. We can tell a quick story about that. And, besides like a mastermind group or being in an Inner Circle group or something like that, like you don't really have a sphere of influence to help you with those questions because you can't ask your attorney. You can't ask your attorney. Your attorney is going to give you the legal answer. Mm-hmm. And we've learned that about a lot of things. I mean, I'm not saying that your attorney is not going to come in handy. You need them to obviously, collect on the property, but you're going to get the legal answer. You're not going to get the business answer. And the legal answer is going to be like, they're in default, go after them to the maximum ability that you can. But guess what? If you super default somebody and they're potentially a really good borrower, you're probably not going to do another loan for them. Right. And, real quick story. And I think we've shared this with a lot of folks in the past, but early on in HMB days, we were doing a loan for a group of real estate investors, and we did quite a bit of deals for them, a dozen or so, over a year or two. Good borrowers, always paid on time, things like that. Well, one of the loans that we did, it went over the loan term. It went over the loan term, and we kind of communicated about it. We were talking to our capital investor. This is kind of early on before we had a lot of, we were kind of we weren't fully funded at the time, and one of our capital investors was like, well, I think you should default them and put them over the term, right? Because he wanted a higher interest rate return and, go to 24% interest, things like that. So we kind of had our hands tied, and we didn't really, so anyways, we defaulted them. We jacked it to 24%. It was a 15% loan rate at the time. Went to 24%. Needless to say, they were super unhappy. We never did another deal for them again. And it was just a bad decision. We shouldn't have done that. We should have we should have just let it ride, potentially just maybe charge them a small extension fee, maybe just kept the interest rate the same and gave them a free extension for a few months. Needless to say, that was a bad one. That was a bad decision on our end by losing business. There was another deal that I think Chris was kind of indirectly talking about where we didn't start the default process early enough. It was an early deal. We were a little bit kind of nervous to take back the property because it needed a lot of work. And I think we were kind of nervous on that. And the borrower kept promising us that, I'm going to make a payment. I'm going to continue to do work. I'm going to do this. Empty promises over and over and over. And 6 months later, we're in the same position that we're in now, which is bad, right? In that particular place, right? There's 6 more months worth of payments that need to be collected and things like that. So that wasn't a good look. So you just learn, right? You learn from your experience on that. We've learned in some of the states that we lend in that maybe it's better to go after the judgment and collect on the judgment and not go for the foreclosure. Sometimes it's, hey, let's foreclose and not spend time on collecting on the judgment.
Yeah. The one situation that we've referenced that was early on and we gave them the benefit of the doubt for too long still pisses me off to this day.
Me too.
Getting the runaround from this investor group. Yeah. And they tanked on a bunch of projects. And I remember this one guy was like, oh, okay. Yeah. I do know that we're behind in payments. I'll bring it up at our next finance meeting and I'll get back to you. And I'm like, bring it up at your next finance meeting. Like, give me a freaking answer. And I felt like a sucker after that one. Like I should have pulled the trigger months before we actually did. And we ended up foreclosing on that one. I don't think we owned it. I think we sold it at auction. Anyway, it's something that we would have done sooner and more effectively had we known. And yeah, I mean, that's one of the reasons why we made the inner circle as the top of the hardmoneymastermind.com. So that we have the support of one another in these situations. Like Jason said, I mean, the lawyer's answer is only part of it. That's only part of how you handle these situations. And yeah, I mean, if you are a mastermind member and a podcast listener and you want to hit us up by email or something like that, we'd be happy to help out. Shoot us a scenario. Happy to give you some feedback on how we would handle it, whether it's a big deal, whether it's not. Like I started with, if anyone is interested in the inner circle, check out Hard Money Mastermind innercircle.com to make application and to come to the November meeting. We hope to see you there, and we'll see you next time on the Private Lenders Podcast.
We hope you enjoyed this episode of the Private Lenders Podcast. Please note that the opinions stated by all the speakers on this show are only opinions and not intended for legal, financial, or accounting advice. Please make sure to always check with your own legal, accounting, and financial professionals. If you enjoyed this episode of the Private Lenders Podcast, we'd appreciate it if you would spread the word. Make sure to check out hardmoneymastermind.com, the #1 free community for new and experienced private and hard money lenders.